In the quiet corners of campus, where the light from the street lamps barely touches, students pass by, never suspecting what hides in the dark. There are stories, whispers, really, passed from one generation of students to the next, stories you laugh off in daylight but can't quite shake when you're alone in the stillness of night. You've heard them before, about the girl who vanished from her dorm room without a trace, or the shadowy figure that watches from the end of the hall when no one else is around. But those are just tales, right? Fiction woven together to give an edge to an otherwise ordinary day. But what if they weren't? What if there was truth to these stories, truth that you don't hear in the retelling? There are places on every campus that students avoid, corridors that never seem quite right, and classrooms where the air feels unnaturally cold even in the dead of summer. Places where you feel watched, though you know you're alone. Maybe you've felt it before, walking late at night, the unsettling feeling that you weren't as alone as you thought. You tell yourself it's nothing. You pick up the pace, your footsteps quickening in the empty hallway, the sound echoing behind you. Almost as if someone else's steps are following in perfect rhythm. You try not to look back. You convince yourself it's just the wind, the creaking of old floors, the natural settling of a building steeped in history. But then, there are the stories, the ones that keep resurfacing no matter how many times they're dismissed, the ones students swear by. The story of the lights in the library that flicker for just a second too long after everyone's left for the night. The janitor who's been working here for years says it's nothing, just faulty wiring, but deep down, you know there's more. The story of the girl who checked into her dorm one evening, but her roommate woke up the next day to find her bed neatly made, her belongings untouched, as if she'd never arrived. The administration never talks about it. It was as if she had never existed. She was just gone. Her name scrubbed from the records, her story only surviving in whispers between students who knew her, saw her, remember her. But the one that no one likes to talk about, the one that lingers in the back of everyone's mind, is the shadow in the old science building. They say it moves in the corner of your eye, too fast to catch but too real to ignore. You can feel it there, even if you never see it. The students who've seen it, they never walk that hallway again. In fact, some of them never come back to campus. A transfer. A sudden leave of absence. No one asks why, but they know. You tell yourself these are just stories, urban legends created by bored students looking to add a thrill to their otherwise monotonous routines. But something about them sticks. You wonder why the stories keep getting passed on, why there's always a thread of truth running through the fabric of these eerie tales. You dismiss it during the day, brush it off as nothing more than rumor. But at night, when the campus is silent and the shadows seem to stretch longer than they should, you wonder. Because there's always a reason behind the fear. There's always something hidden beneath the surface of what seems normal, something just out of sight, just out of reach, waiting. Waiting for the right moment. Welcome to today's video, where we unravel the threads of 3 terrifying, true stories, each one experienced by students just like you. These aren't tales spun from imagination. They're based on events that sent shivers down the spines of those who lived through them and still haunt their memories today. These stories unfold in places you might recognize, familiar classrooms, dormitories, and lecture halls. But what you're about to hear will change the way you look at those everyday spaces forever. Picture this, a late-night study session in a seemingly ordinary library, a lone student working under the dim flicker of fluorescent lights, and suddenly, an unexplainable sound echoes through the empty halls. Or maybe a dorm room where the temperature drops just a little too much, no matter how high you turn up the heat. And then there's the building everyone avoids, the one no one talks about, but everyone knows has a history. For some, these stories are nothing more than legends. But for others, they're a living nightmare. These are stories passed down in hushed whispers from one year to the next, warnings to the newcomers who think they're safe. But safety is an illusion, and what lies just beneath the surface of these seemingly ordinary events will leave you questioning everything. Have you ever experienced something strange at your school? A moment that sent a chill down your spine, left you frozen in place, unsure of what you had just witnessed. Maybe it was a flicker of movement out of the corner of your eye, or a door that creaked open on its own. Whatever it was, you knew, deep down, that you weren't alone in that moment. Share your experience in the comments below, because sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that hit a little too close to home. And trust me when I say, you'll want to stick around for the final story in today's video. It's the one that will leave you wide awake long after you've turned off your screen, haunted by a question that has no easy answer: what if it happens to me? So, sit back. But don't get too comfortable, because what you're about to hear might make you question the very spaces you thought were safe. These are true horror stories, real, unsettling events experienced by students who, like you, thought they were just going about their everyday lives. Until something they couldn't explain, changed everything. It started like any other semester. The students at Maplewood University were settling into their routines, rushing between classes, cramming for exams, and trying to survive on a diet of cheap coffee and late-night fast food. In the middle of it all was Sarah, a freshman like any other, navigating her first taste of independence, forging new friendships, and adjusting to life away from home. Her friends, a tight-knit group who had formed during orientation, noticed Sarah's absence one day. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal. After all, students miss classes all the time. Maybe she was sick or had gone home for a weekend trip. But as days passed, Sarah's absence grew more noticeable. She wasn't in her dorm, and no one had seen her in any of their shared classes. "She'll turn up," they said, brushing it off, convincing themselves that there was nothing to worry about. But that was before things started getting strange. At first, it was easy to write off Sarah's disappearance as some kind of mix-up. Maybe she just decided to leave without telling anyone. College life can be overwhelming, and students drop out all the time, right? But when her friends started asking around, things quickly took a disturbing turn. They approached the administration to ask if Sarah had officially withdrawn from the university, but the office staff looked at them in confusion. "Sarah?" they asked. "We don't have anyone by that name enrolled here." Her friends, now more concerned than ever, pressed on. They checked the dorm records, the class rosters, even tried to contact Sarah's family, but it was as if she had never existed. There was no record of her anywhere. No student ID, no official transcripts, nothing. Her dorm room, it was assigned to another student, one who claimed she had been living there the entire semester. And that's when things started getting truly bizarre. Late at night, Sarah's friends began to experience strange occurrences. It started with small things: doors that would close by themselves, the faint sound of footsteps in empty hallways, lights flickering for no apparent reason. At first, they chalked it up to the quirks of an old campus building, but the incidents grew more frequent, and more unsettling. One night, as a group of them were studying in the library, something happened that none of them could explain. The library had long since emptied out, and the only sound was the quiet hum of the overhead lights. Suddenly, they heard it, the unmistakable sound of books falling from a shelf. They all turned to look, but there was no one there. Just a pile of books lying on the floor, their pages fluttering as if someone had brushed past them. One of the students, Mike, decided to investigate. As he walked between the rows of shelves, he swore he could hear whispering, soft, indistinct, but definitely there. He turned around, expecting to see someone standing behind him, but the aisle was empty. His heart raced as the whispers grew louder, more insistent, but no matter where he looked, he couldn't find the source. Back at the table, the others watched in silence as the lights overhead began to flicker again, plunging the room into momentary darkness. When the lights came back on, they were all staring at the same thing, a single book lying open on the table. None of them had touched it, and yet there it was, pages spread wide as if begging to be read. But it wasn't just the library. In their dorms, things began to move on their own. Desks would shift slightly, chairs would creak in the middle of the night, and worst of all, they would hear it, the scratching. Soft, almost imperceptible, but there, like fingernails dragging across wood. It came from the walls, from the floor, and even from the ceiling. One night, Sarah's roommate, Lisa, woke up to the sound of quiet laughter, giggling, faint and eerie, as though someone was standing right next to her bed. She sat up quickly, her heart pounding, but there was no one there. Just the darkness of her room, and the unsettling feeling that she was being watched. The group couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It was as if the very campus itself was trying to erase Sarah from existence, and they were powerless to stop it. That's when Mike found it, the journal. Tucked away in the back of an old locker in the science building, the leather-bound journal was hidden beneath a pile of dust-covered papers. It looked old, the pages yellowed and brittle, but as Mike flipped through it, he realized it wasn't just any journal. The entries were written by a student from decades ago, a student who had been researching strange disappearances on campus. According to the journal, Sarah wasn't the first student to vanish. There had been others. Students who had simply disappeared, leaving no trace behind. Their names, their records, even their dorm rooms had been wiped clean as if they had never existed. But the final entry in the journal was the most disturbing of all. Written in shaky, frantic handwriting, it read, "He's still here, watching. I can feel him. He won't let me leave. If you're reading this, you're next." As Mike read the words, a chill ran down his spine. He quickly closed the journal and backed away from the locker, but it was too late. From the corner of his eye, he saw it, a shadow moving across the hallway, faster than any human could move. He turned to look, but there was nothing there. Just the empty corridor and the sound of a loud creak echoing through the building. Mike and his friends never spoke about what happened that night. They never went back to the science building, and they never mentioned Sarah again. But the journal? It vanished, just like Sarah. To this day, no one knows where it went, or who, or what, might have taken it. But what's even more terrifying is what they found next. Something that shouldn't exist. Something that can't be explained. College life is a new beginning. For many students, moving into a dorm means freedom, independence, and the chance to start fresh. But for Emily, her new dorm room felt less like a sanctuary and more like a cage, one she would soon realize wasn't empty. It started the very first night. Emily had just finished unpacking her things and was getting ready to settle in for bed when she heard it, 3 soft knocks on her door. She paused, waiting for a follow-up knock, maybe a visitor from her hall stopping by. But when she opened the door, the hallway was empty, eerily silent. Brushing it off as nothing, Emily closed the door and returned to her bed, but the feeling lingered, that nagging sense that she wasn't alone. Over the next few days, the knocks became more frequent. Always in the dead of night, always 3 knocks, and always no one outside. But the knocking was only the beginning. Soon, other strange occurrences began to unfold. Emily would leave her books neatly stacked on her desk, only to return and find them scattered across the room. Her phone would light up in the middle of the night, displaying a message from an unknown number, just a single word, "Hello." The first time it happened, she ignored it, chalking it up to a prank. But when it happened again the next night, with the same message, she couldn't shake the growing sense of unease. She mentioned it to her RA, but the response was dismissive, "That room's been a bit odd for a while now. But don't worry, it's nothing to be concerned about." Odd? That wasn't exactly the reassurance she had hoped for. As the weeks went by, the strange incidents escalated. She would wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of footsteps pacing outside her door. They weren't quick, frantic steps, but slow, deliberate, almost as if someone was dragging their feet. Every time she built up the courage to check, the hallway was empty. The lights would flicker, sometimes for seconds, sometimes for minutes, bathing her room in shadow. One night, while getting ready for bed, she heard a soft, melodic hum, faint, like a lullaby. She froze. The sound was coming from the mirror. She leaned closer, and her blood ran cold. It wasn't just a hum, it was her own voice, softly singing a tune she didn't recognize. The realization made her stomach turn. Her reflection seemed to move slightly out of sync with her, as if it were lagging just behind, watching her from a second too late. The next day, she reached out to some of the other students on her floor, hoping someone might have an explanation. That's when she learned the truth about room 314. For years, students who had lived in that room never lasted more than a semester. The RA admitted to her that it had become something of a ghost story among the staff. Students would report strange noises, objects moving on their own, and most disturbingly, hearing their own voices calling them, sometimes from the mirror, sometimes from somewhere deeper within the walls. One former resident even claimed that she had woken up in the middle of the night to see her reflection standing at the foot of her bed, smiling back at her. Emily felt a chill creep down her spine as the stories piled up. Each one seemed worse than the last, and yet there were no clear answers. No explanation for what was happening in room 314. The more Emily learned, the more the strange occurrences increased. The knocking returned, louder now, more insistent. Her belongings would shift in front of her eyes, pens rolling off the desk, her lamp flickering even when turned off. And then there was the mirror. Every night, her reflection seemed a little different. At first, it was subtle, a delayed blink, a slightly off smile. But soon, it was undeniable. Her reflection was watching her. One night, she turned off the lights and was about to go to sleep when she heard it. The soft voice from the mirror, only this time it wasn't humming, it was speaking. "Emily. I see you." Panicked, she flipped the light back on and stared into the mirror. Her reflection stood there, motionless, but she could have sworn it was grinning. The next day, Emily tried to request a room transfer, but the campus was full. She was stuck in room 314. The next night, as Emily lay in bed trying to calm her racing thoughts, she heard a faint sound, footsteps. They were different this time. They didn't come from the hallway but from inside the room. She lay frozen, too terrified to move. The footsteps stopped at the foot of her bed. In the dim light, she saw a shadow, a figure standing there, watching her. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she forced herself to sit up. The shadow at the foot of her bed didn't move. It was tall, its features obscured by the darkness, but she could feel its eyes on her, cold, unblinking. She wanted to scream, but the fear lodged itself in her throat like a stone. The figure bent down, moving closer. As it did, the room seemed to grow colder, the air thick with an oppressive weight. It leaned over her, and in a voice that was barely more than a whisper, it spoke, "You're next." Emily didn't wait to find out what would happen next. She bolted out of bed, raced for the door, and threw it open, running down the hallway without looking back. She didn't stop until she was outside, the cool night air hitting her face like a wave of relief. She never slept in room 314 again. The next morning, Emily returned to gather her things, but something was different. The mirror was gone. In its place was a blank, cold wall, as if it had never existed. The RA had no explanation, and no one else seemed to remember it ever being there. The strange occurrences stopped after that, but Emily knew better. She knew it wasn't over. Emily escaped, but not everyone is so lucky. Some rooms hold more than just memories. Some rooms never let you leave. But what happens when you're trapped not just in a room, but in an entire building, one that you can never escape from? Our next story reveals just how real nightmares can become. A field trip is supposed to be a day of exploration, learning, and maybe a break from the monotony of school life. But for this group of students, it was something much darker. Their day was filled with excitement, a trip to an old, abandoned building, a relic of history that had been long forgotten. The building had been closed for decades, rumored to be unsafe, crumbling. But what they didn't know was that this school wasn't just forgotten. It was trapped in time. They didn't even plan to go inside. But when the bus broke down miles from the nearest town, the driver had no choice but to lead them into the school for shelter. It seemed like a simple solution at first: stay dry, wait for help, and leave. That was their plan, until the doors shut behind them. The bus pulls up to the front of an old, derelict school. The building is covered in vines, windows are shattered, but eerily, the entrance doors seem untouched, as though waiting for them to walk through. The students step off the bus, the atmosphere heavy with tension, as if the very air around them is resisting their presence. The first thing they noticed was the silence. Inside the school, it was as if the world outside had vanished. No wind, no rustling of leaves, no sounds of nature at all. Just the heavy, oppressive quiet. The walls were lined with lockers, their paint chipped and rusted, but the classrooms? They looked pristine, too pristine. Desks were neatly arranged, textbooks sat open as if waiting for students to return. Chalkboards were clean, but that changed quickly. When they glanced back at the chalkboards, there were words, hastily scrawled in white chalk: "We see you." It was unsettling, but some students laughed it off as a prank. "Maybe another group got here before us," one of them suggested. But when they tried to leave, the doors wouldn't budge. They pushed, pulled, even kicked, but it was as if the building itself had decided they weren't allowed to leave. The students spread out, searching for another exit. But every hallway they turned down led them back to the same spot. The stairwells spiraled up and down into nothingness, and the windows, no matter how hard they tried, wouldn't break. As they wandered, they realized something else: the clocks on the walls weren't just stopped, they were all set to the same time, frozen at 3:15. And no matter how long they walked, time didn't seem to move. As the hours passed, fear turned to panic. The building, once eerie but manageable, now felt like a prison. The walls seemed to close in on them, the hallways stretching longer, the ceiling lower. Each door they opened led to more of the same: empty classrooms, abandoned desks, blackboards filled with more cryptic messages: "Stay forever. No one leaves." One of the students, Mark, found a map of the school in a dusty, forgotten office. But when they followed it, the map made no sense. Every turn they made led them back to the same hallway. And then there was the intercom. A crackling voice echoed over the speaker system, distorted and hollow, as if it had been playing on loop for years. "All students report to the principal's office," it said, in a tone that sent chills down their spines. But no matter how hard they searched, they couldn't find the office. What was worse? They couldn't find each other. The group slowly realized that they were no longer together. Some students swore they saw their friends just down the hall, but when they ran to catch up, they found only empty spaces. Desperation set in as the isolation became more pronounced. They could hear their own names being whispered through the walls, faintly, but growing louder. After what felt like hours, Mark, still clutching the crumpled map, stumbled upon an old filing cabinet. It was covered in dust, untouched for years. Inside, he found records of students who had attended the school years ago, but something was wrong. The names were too familiar. The dates didn't make sense. And then he saw it, his own name, scrawled at the top of a list dated 1974. The others found similar records, each of their names, as if they had been students here decades ago. Panic turned to horror as they realized the school hadn't existed on any map for years. The last entry in the file was from 1975, the year the school was said to have been abandoned after a mysterious disappearance of the entire student body. That's when they saw it. At the end of the hall, what they thought was an exit, a door with a single word carved into it: freedom. They ran towards it, heartbeats racing, but as they reached the door, they noticed something engraved on the wall beside it: "No one leaves." The door slammed shut behind them, trapping them in darkness. The last thing they heard was the chilling sound of a school bell ringing, louder and louder until everything went silent. To this day, no one knows what happened to the students who entered that school. Their bus was found, still waiting outside, the engine still warm, but the students? They were never seen again. The building remains, a ghost of the past, untouched, unexplained. Some say it's waiting for its next visitors, and if you're ever in the area, be sure to check the clocks. If they're stopped at 3:15, it's already too late. 3 stories. 3 encounters with the unknown. Each a reminder that not all nightmares end when we wake up. The student who vanished, his memory erased from the minds of everyone around him. The dorm room that echoed with whispers from another world, trapping those unlucky enough to cross its threshold. And the school, frozen in time, where students walked in but never walked out. These stories remind us that what lies in the shadows of our most familiar places, our schools, our homes, might be more than just imagination. These aren't just stories to be told around a campfire. They're real. The people in them are real. They went to school just like we all do. They walked those halls, lived in those dorms, trusted their reality, until it twisted into something far more disturbing. And what haunts these stories the most isn't just the terrifying events themselves, but the unanswered questions they leave behind. What really happened to the student who disappeared from the minds of his peers, leaving behind only faint memories and cold whispers? What force was watching over those students trapped in the school that shouldn't have existed on any map? And what still lingers in the haunted dorm room that drives every resident to leave before the semester is over? Maybe, just maybe, our schools hold secrets we'll never fully understand. A place meant for learning can also become a place where nightmares dwell. And perhaps, every one of us has had a brush with the unknown, something we couldn't explain, something we quickly dismissed and tried to forget. But what if that feeling wasn't your imagination? What if the unseen forces around us are just waiting for us to let our guard down? The narration is accompanied by shots of an old, eerie school hallway, flickering lights, and shadows moving at the edge of the frame. The tension grows, leading to the call to action. So, which of these stories left you chilled to the bone? Was it the classmate who vanished from existence, the dorm room no one could survive, or the haunted school that time forgot? Let me know in the comments below. And if you've ever experienced something strange at your school, share your story. I might just feature it in an upcoming video. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more terrifying true tales. And remember, sometimes, the scariest stories are the ones that happen right under our noses. And if you thought these stories were terrifying, just wait until next week, when we explore the true horror behind one of the most infamous cursed objects in history. You won't believe what happened to those who came in contact with it.